Kiwu stood at the entrance of the Galactic Council chambers, his hands steady despite the weight of what he carried. The data pad in his briefcase contained humanity's most important message to the galaxy. Earth needed allies, and time was running out. The chamber itself was massive, built to hold beings from dozens of different worlds. Crystal spires rose from the floor where the Veltari delegates sat, their bodies made of living gemstone that caught and reflected light in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. Floating above them were the Nephim, gaseous beings contained in environmental suits that glowed with soft blue light. Other species filled the remaining spaces, some humanoid, others so alien that Kiwu could barely understand their basic anatomy. So-Min walked beside him, her tablet ready to record everything that happened. She had worked with Kiwu for 3 years now, ever since humanity had been granted basic communication rights with the Council. Today would be different from their usual trade discussions or territorial boundary talks. Today they were asking for help with something that could destroy them all. "Remember," Kiwu whispered to So-Min as they approached the speaking platform, "we stick to the facts. No emotion, no begging. Just the truth about what we found." The chamber fell quiet as Kiwu reached the center platform. Above him, Speaker Thexara's crystalline form shifted colors from deep blue to warning red. The Veltari leader's voice echoed through the chamber with the sound of wind chimes in a storm. "The human delegation wishes to address the Council," Thexara announced. "You may proceed, Ambassador Kiwu of Earth." Kiwu activated his translator and began. "Honored members of the Galactic Council, I come before you today with urgent news. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected the approach of the Void Swarm. They have already consumed the outer systems of the Kepler sector and are moving toward inhabited space." A wave of concerned sounds rippled through the chamber. The Void Swarm was not unknown to the Council, but they had been dormant for over 1,000 years. Some younger species had begun to think they were just legends used to frighten children. War Marshal Zephylos of the Nephim floated forward, his gaseous form swirling with agitation. "Impossible. Our long-range sensors show no signs of swarm activity. How could a primitive species like yours detect something our advanced technology cannot?" Kiwu kept his voice calm. "Our sensors work differently than yours. We use a combination of gravitational wave detection and quantum entanglement monitoring. 3 weeks ago, we detected the mass displacement patterns that match historical swarm movement. 2 weeks ago, we confirmed it when the Rigel outpost went silent." "The Rigel outpost is experiencing communication difficulties," interrupted Council. Member Vextar, a spider-like being from the Arachnos Empire. "There is no evidence of swarm involvement." So-Min stepped forward and activated a holographic display. The image showed star charts with red markers indicating systems that had gone silent over the past month. The pattern was clear. Something was moving through space, consuming everything in its path. "This is our evidence," Kiwu said. "The swarm is not just returning. They are larger and more organized than ever before. Our estimates suggest they will reach Council core worlds within 6 months." Laughter began in the chamber. Not the pleasant sound of amusement, but the harsh noise of disbelief and scorn. Council member Jaxoth of the Reptilian Alliance slapped his tail against his seat. "You expect us to believe that humans who have been spacefaring for less than 500 years have discovered a threat that our civilizations missed? We who have traveled the stars for tens of thousands of years?" More laughter joined in. Kiwu felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his expression neutral. This was going exactly as Earth's leaders had feared it would. Speaker Thexara raised one crystalline appendage for silence. "Let the human continue. What exactly are you proposing?" Kiwu took a deep breath. "Earth formally requests to join the defensive alliance against the Void Swarm. We offer our fleet, our soldiers, and our resources to help defend Council space." The laughter became louder now, almost deafening. War Marshal Zephlos's gaseous form turned bright orange, with what Kiwu had learned was Nephim amusement. "Your fleet?" Zephylos said through his translator. "You have perhaps 200 ships, most of them barely capable of interstellar travel. Your weapons are chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Your soldiers carry rifles that fire tiny pieces of lead. What could you possibly contribute to a war against beings that consume entire star systems? Council member Dracus of the Silicon Confederation added her electronic voice to the mockery. Our records show that humans still use nuclear fission for energy. You have not even mastered proper fusion technology. Your medical science cannot even prevent your own aging. Why would we accept help from such a primitive species? Kiwu's jaw tightened, but he continued. Our technology may be different, but it is effective. Our military has experience with asymmetric warfare. We understand how to fight enemies that are larger and more advanced than ourselves. Experience fighting whom? Asked Vextar. Each other? Yes, we know about your species' history of warfare. You fight over resources, territory, ideology. You have never faced anything like the Void Swarm. Somin stepped closer to Kiwu, her tablet recording every word of the humiliation. She had expected this, but watching it happen was still painful. Earth had spent months preparing this presentation, gathering evidence, formulating plans. All of it was being dismissed without serious consideration. Speaker Thexara's colors shifted to a deep purple that Kiwu had learned meant the Veltari equivalent of boredom. Ambassador Kiwu, the Council appreciates your concern about this theoretical threat. However, we cannot allocate resources based on unconfirmed reports from an inexperienced species. If the Void Swarm were truly returning, our own sensors would have detected them long ago. But the evidence, Kiwu began. The evidence, interrupted Council Member Yortan of the Energy Beings, shows only that some remote outposts have experienced communication failures. This happens regularly due to solar flares, equipment malfunctions, or simple human error. There is no credible threat. War Marshal Zeflos floated closer to the platform. Furthermore, even if this threat were real, humanity would be of no use in defending against it. The Void Swarm consumes biological matter and converts it to fuel their reproduction. They adapt to energy weapons, develop immunity to chemical attacks, and overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers. What could primitive kinetic weapons accomplish against such a force? Our simulations suggest, Somin started to say. Your simulations are based on incomplete data and inferior processing power, Dracus interrupted. The Silicon Confederation's quantum computers have run millions of scenarios. The only effective defense against the Void Swarm is advanced energy shielding combined with plasma weaponry, technologies your species does not possess. Kiwu felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. This had been humanity's last hope for gaining allies before the swarm arrived. Without Council support, Earth would face the threat alone. I understand your position, Kiwu said carefully, but I ask that you at least consider allowing human observers to participate in your defense planning. We may see solutions that others have missed. The laughter that followed was the cruelest yet. Several Council members actually stood up from their seats to express their amusement more fully. Observers? Thexara's colors flashed between red and orange in what Kiwu recognized as Veltari amazement. You want primitive humans to observe our most sensitive military planning? You want access to defense technologies that your species could not understand, much less contribute to? We offer our knowledge freely, Kiwu replied. Our military theorists have studied the historical records of swarm attacks. We believe we have identified patterns in their behavior that previous analyses missed. Vextar's mandibles clicked, in the Arachnos equivalent of laughter. Your military theorists have studied our records for perhaps a few years. Our strategists have analyzed swarm behavior for millennia. Do you truly believe you could notice something we have overlooked? War Marshal Zeflos's form brightened with what appeared to be genuine anger. The arrogance of this species continues to astound me. They request military alliance based on unproven threat assessment. They offer primitive weapons as if they were valuable contributions. Now they suggest their amateur analysis could improve upon the work of the galaxy's greatest military minds. Kiwu realized that continuing to argue would only make things worse. The Council had made up their minds before he had even begun speaking. They saw humanity as children playing with dangerous toys, not as potential allies in a coming war. I withdraw the request for alliance, Kiwu said quietly. But I formally notify the Council that Earth will continue monitoring for swarm activity. When they arrive, we will be ready to defend ourselves. With what? Asked Jexoth. Your chemical, explosives and metal bullets, your nuclear fission reactors and primitive computers. The swarm will consume your entire species before your weapons can even damage their outer hull plating. Speaker Thexara's colors settled into the cool blue that indicated the end of discussion. The Council notes humanity's concerns and appreciates their. 3 days after Kiwu's return to Earth, the Emergency War Council convened in the underground command center beneath Geneva. The massive room buzzed with activity as Earth's greatest military minds gathered around holographic displays showing star charts, weapon specifications, and analysis reports. Admiral Tejo stood at the center of it all, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. At 62, he had seen more combat than any other officer in the Earth Defense Force. His experience ranged from the Mars colony conflicts to the asteroid mining wars. Now he faced something entirely different. Show me what we know, Tejo said to Dr. Minho, who stood beside a massive holographic display. Minho activated the projection, and the room filled with three-dimensional images of the void swarm specimens they had managed to recover from destroyed ships in the outer systems. The creatures were unlike anything in Earth's biological databases, part organic tissue, part metallic structure, part energy matrix. They seemed to exist in a state between life and machine. These are individual swarm units, Minho explained, pointing to the smaller specimens. They range from the size of a human fist to larger than a shuttlecraft. But they're not independent organisms. They're more like cells in a massive biological machine. General Youngie leaned forward to study the display more closely. Her expertise in ground warfare had earned her respect throughout the Earth Defense Force, but this was unlike any enemy she had faced before. How do they reproduce? Youngie asked. They don't reproduce in the traditional sense, Minho replied. They consume biological matter and convert it directly into new swarm units. The process is incredibly efficient. One destroyed city can provide enough raw material to create hundreds of new units. Ji-Yoon, the Earth Defense Force's leading AI specialist, stepped forward with her own tablet. I've been analyzing the communication patterns we intercepted from the swarm units. They don't communicate through electromagnetic signals or quantum entanglement like most spacefaring species. They use something closer to a biological neural network. What does that mean for us? Tejo asked. It means they think and react as a collective organism, Ji-Yoon explained. But it also means they have built-in assumptions about how other species will behave. They expect energy weapons, plasma shields, and defensive strategies because that's what every species they've encountered has used. Captain Dong-hyun entered the chamber carrying a stack of reconnaissance reports. His stealth frigate squadron had been conducting dangerous missions to the edge of swarm space for the past 2 weeks, gathering intelligence that the Council's sensors had missed. Admiral, you need to see this, Dong-hyun said, activating his own holographic display. The image showed a swarm hive ship, a massive biological construct the size of a small moon. Its surface writhed with activity as thousands of smaller units moved across its hull. This is one of their command ships, Dong-hyun continued. We watched it attack a Rigel defense station. The station had advanced energy shields, plasma cannons, and particle beam weapons. The swarm adapted to every single defense within hours. The room fell silent as they watched the recording. The Rigel station's energy shields held initially, but the swarm units began to change their cellular structure, becoming resistant to the shield frequency. The plasma cannons destroyed hundreds of units, but the swarm quickly developed armor, plating that deflected the plasma beams. Within 6 hours, the station was overrun. But watch this, Dong-hyun said, advancing the recording to show his own ship's escape. When a group of swarm units pursued his frigate, he had used a simple kinetic missile, essentially a chunk of tungsten fired at high velocity. The swarm units had no defense against it. The primitive projectile tore through their biological armor like paper. They've never encountered kinetic weapons, Admiral Tejo realized. Every spacefaring species they've fought has used energy weapons. Exactly, Minho confirmed. Their adaptation mechanisms are designed to counter energy-based attacks, electromagnetic radiation, and plasma physics. They have no evolutionary response to simple kinetic impact or chemical explosions. Commander Hyojin, who had been quietly studying the tactical displays, suddenly spoke up. They're not adapted to nuclear weapons either. The room turned to look at her. Hyojin commanded the Earth Defense Force's Nuclear Warfare Division, a branch that most other species considered primitive and barbaric. The Council had banned nuclear weapons in civilized space centuries ago, viewing them as crude tools of self-destruction. Explain, Taeho ordered. Look at their cellular structure, Hyojin said, pointing to Minho's biological analysis. They're designed to absorb and redirect energy. Plasma, particle beams, even electromagnetic radiation. They can channel that energy into their adaptation systems. But nuclear fission releases energy in a completely different way. It doesn't just create heat and light, it tears apart atomic structures. Jion's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Their biological adaptation systems can't counter something that destroys matter at the atomic level. Every species they've fought has tried to be more advanced than them, Young-A added. They've developed counters to advanced technology, but they've never faced anyone who fought dirty. President Changmin, who had been listening quietly from the observation deck, descended to join the discussion. As Earth's leader, he had the final authority on military action, but he also understood that this decision would determine humanity's survival. What exactly are you proposing? Changmin asked. Admiral Taeho looked around the room at his officers, then back at the president. We stopped trying to fight like a civilized species. Every battle the swarm has won, they've won because their enemies tried to use superior technology. The Veltari tried to outshield them. The Nephim tried to outmaneuver them. The Silicon Confederation tried to outcompute them. And, Changmin prompted, we do the opposite. We use the most primitive, brutal, and effective weapons we have. Nuclear missiles, kinetic bombardment, chemical explosives. We fight like humans. The implications of this strategy began to sink in around the room. Humanity would not just be defending Earth. They would be launching an offensive campaign using weapons that the rest of the galaxy considered barbaric. Captain Dong Hyun pulled up his reconnaissance data again. I've identified 17 swarm hive ships in the outer systems. They're moving in a predictable pattern, consuming worlds one at a time. If we could hit them while they're focused on feeding, we might catch them completely unprepared. The Council will never approve this. President Changmin pointed out, they've already refused our request for alliance. If we launch an unauthorized military campaign, they might consider us a hostile force. Let them, General Young-A said firmly. The Council thinks we're too primitive to matter. They won't interfere with something they consider a suicide mission. Ji-Yun brought up new data on her tablet. I've been running simulations based on the swarm's adaptation patterns. If we use a combination of nuclear weapons and kinetic bombardment, we could destroy their hive ships faster than they can adapt. But we'd need to hit them hard and fast. How fast? Taeho asked. Complete surprise attack. Full nuclear barrage, followed immediately by kinetic strikes. No warning, no negotiation, no mercy. If we give them time to adapt, we lose the advantage. Dr. Minho highlighted a section of the biological analysis. There's something else. The swarm units share a collective consciousness through their neural network. If we can damage enough of them quickly enough, we might be able to disrupt their coordination completely. Commander Hyojin was already working on weapons calculations. We have 300 nuclear warheads in active inventory, plus another 500 in deep storage. If we retrofit our missile cruisers with rapid-fire launchers, we could deliver massive nuclear barrages in minutes instead of hours. What about kinetic weapons? Young-A asked. Our railgun destroyers can fire tungsten rods at near light speed, Dong Hyun replied. At those velocities, even a small projectile hits with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon. The swarm's biological armor can't possibly absorb that kind of kinetic energy. Admiral Taeho studied the tactical displays, running through scenarios in his mind. This wasn't just a military strategy. It was a complete rejection of how civilized species were supposed to conduct warfare. The Council fought with honor, following rules and protocols developed over thousands of years. Humanity would fight to win. There's one more thing, Ji-un said quietly. If this works, if we actually defeat the swarm using primitive weapons, it's going to change how the galaxy sees us. Good, President Changmin said. It's time the galaxy learned that being advanced doesn't always mean being superior. The planning session continued for 6 more hours. They discussed fleet positioning, target priorities, ammunition loads, and escape routes. Every detail was examined and re-examined. By the end, they had a complete battle plan that would either save humanity or destroy it entirely. As the meeting broke up, the various commanders returned to their ships to begin preparations. Admiral Tae-ho remained in the command center with President Changmin and Dr. Min-ho. Are we really going to do this? Changmin asked. Launch a nuclear offensive against an enemy that has defeated civilizations far. The view from the bridge of the EDS Incheon's Wrath was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Tae-ho stood at the command center, watching as 300 human warships moved through space in perfect formation. This was not the careful defensive positioning that other species used when facing the Void Swarm. This was something else entirely. Fleet status report, Tae-ho called to his communications officer. All ships reporting ready, Admiral, Lieutenant Park replied. Nuclear weapons armed and ready. Kinetic bombardment systems online, all fighter squadrons prepared for launch. Through the massive viewing windows, Tae-ho could see the other ships in the formation. The heavy cruisers bristled with missile launchers loaded with nuclear warheads. The destroyers had their railgun systems charging, ready to fire tungsten, rods at velocities that would make them more destructive than most energy weapons. Fighter carriers prepared to launch squadrons of small, fast ships armed with fusion bombs and kinetic missiles. Captain Lee, the Incheon's Wrath's commanding officer, approached with the latest intelligence reports. Admiral, our scouts report that the swarm has reached the Vega system. They're consuming the mining colonies there. How many swarm ships? Tae-ho asked. 17 hive ships, plus approximately 5,000 smaller units. They're spread across 3 planets feeding. Tae-ho studied the tactical display showing the swarm's positions. This was exactly what they had hoped for. The enemy was distracted, focused on consuming the Vega colonies rather than watching for threats. It was the perfect time to strike. Signal the fleet, Tae-ho ordered. We attack in 6 hours. Full. Nuclear barrage followed by kinetic bombardment. No survivors. The message went out to all 300 ships, and across the fleet, humans began their final preparations for battle. This was not the careful, honorable warfare that dominated galactic civilization. This was something primal and ruthless. On the carrier EDS Busan, fighter pilot Sung Min ran through his pre-flight checks one final time. His fighter was smaller and less advanced than the energy-based ships used by other species. But it carried something they didn't. A payload of 12 nuclear missiles and enough kinetic penetrators to destroy a small asteroid. Pilots, this is your final briefing, Commander Cho announced over the carrier's communication system. Our job is to get in close and hit the swarm units that survive the initial bombardment. Remember, these things adapt to energy weapons, but they've never seen nuclear fission. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't give them time to think. Sung-min checked his weapon systems one more time. Each nuclear missile had a yield equivalent to the bombs that had ended World War III on Earth. The kinetic penetrators were simple tungsten rods that would hit with the force of lightning strikes. Primitive weapons by galactic standards, but they would do the job. Across the fleet, similar preparations were taking place. On the destroyer EDS Seoul's Fury, Captain Dong Hyun calibrated his ship's railgun systems. The magnetic accelerators could fire projectiles at nearly 10% of light speed. At those velocities, even a small piece of metal became a devastating weapon. Sir, his weapons officer called out, the railgun capacitors are fully charged. We have 6 tungsten rods loaded and ready. Good, Dong Hyun replied. Remember, we fire all 6 rods in rapid succession. The swarm adapts quickly, but they can't adapt to 6 simultaneous impacts from different angles. The Seoul's Fury was not alone in its preparations. Throughout the fleet, ships loaded with chemical explosives, nuclear warheads, and kinetic weapons, prepared for a style of warfare that the galaxy had not seen in thousands of years. Meanwhile, on the Council's monitoring station at Proxima Centauri, War Marshal Zeflos watched the human fleet with growing confusion. The Nephilim leader's gaseous form swirled with colors that indicated deep concern. What exactly do they think they're accomplishing? Zeflos asked his tactical officer. Unknown, sir. Their ships are moving toward the Vega system where swarm activity has been confirmed. But their weapon signatures are all wrong. We're detecting nuclear warheads, chemical explosives, and simple kinetic projectiles. Are they planning to evacuate the Vega colonies? No, sir. Their formation is clearly offensive. They're preparing to attack the swarm directly. Zeflos's form flashed bright orange with amazement. With nuclear weapons? Against the Void Swarm? Do they have any idea what they're facing? On the Council Station's communication array, an emergency session was being broadcast from the main chambers. Speaker Thexara's crystalline form was shifting rapidly between colors as she addressed the assembled delegates. The human fleet has ignored all attempts at communication, Thexara announced. They are proceeding with what appears to be a direct assault on confirmed swarm positions using primitive weapons technology. Council member Vextar's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement or concern. Should we warn them about the futility of their approach? We tried, replied War Marshal Zeflos via communication link. They're not responding to our signals. Either their communication systems are primitive, or they're deliberately ignoring us. Dr. Velnara of the Veltari Science Council had been studying the human fleet's movements through long-range sensors. Unlike the other council members, she seemed more puzzled than amused by what she was seeing. There's something unusual about their formation, Velnara reported. They're not positioning themselves for defensive action or evacuation. They're arranging their ships for coordinated bombardment, multiple attack vectors, overlapping fields of fire, concentration of maximum destructive force. Against the Void Swarm? Asked Council Member Dracus. With primitive weapons? That's what the sensor data indicates. Thexara's colors shifted to deep blue, indicating serious consideration. Could they possibly know something we don't? Some weakness in the swarm that our analyses have missed? Impossible, Zeflos replied firmly. The swarm has been studied for millennia. Every possible weakness has been identified and tested. Energy weapons are ineffective due to their adaptation capabilities. Chemical weapons are useless against their biological structure. Physical barriers cannot contain them. The only successful defense is advanced energy shielding combined with strategic retreat. And yet, Velnara observed, they continue to advance. Back on the Incheon's Wrath, Admiral Taeho received reports from his scout ships. Captain Donghyun's reconnaissance had provided detailed intelligence about the swarm's positions and activities in the Vega system. The swarm is concentrated around Vega 3, reported Intelligence Officer Kim. They're in feeding mode, consuming the planet's biosphere. 17 hive ships, each approximately 5 kilometers in length. Support units numbering in the thousands. Perfect, Taeho said grimly. They're distracted and clustered together. Signal all ships, we attack in 30 minutes. Throughout the fleet, the final countdown began. Nuclear weapons were armed. Kinetic bombardment systems came online. Fighter squadrons moved to launch positions. This was humanity's moment of truth. On the fighter carrier Busan, Sung Min climbed into his cockpit and began the startup sequence. Around him, hundreds of other pilots did the same. Their fighters were simple by galactic standards: chemical rockets, basic life support, primitive navigation systems, but they carried enough destructive power to level cities. All pilots. This is Squadron Leader Sung Min, he announced over the communication channel. Remember your training. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we don't give the swarm time to adapt. Nuclear missiles first, then kinetic strikes on anything that's still moving. The carrier's launch bay doors opened, revealing the star field beyond. In the distance, the Vega system waited, unaware that it was about to become the site of the most important battle in human history. Admiral Taeho watched the countdown timer reach its final seconds. This was the moment when humanity would either prove itself as a galactic power or be destroyed attempting it. Either way, the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. All ships, Tejo announced over the fleet communication channel. This is Admiral Tejo. In 30 seconds, we will engage the Void Swarm using weapons and tactics that no civilized species has employed for thousands of years. We will fight not with honor, not with advanced technology, but with the absolute determination to win. The galaxy thinks we are primitive. Today, we show them that primitive can be devastating. The timer reached 0. All ships, attack. 300 human warships unleashed hell itself upon the Void Swarm. Nuclear missiles streaked through space, like falling stars. Kinetic bombardment systems fired tungsten rods at velocities that warped space around them. Fighter squadrons burst from their carriers in swarms that rivaled the enemy they faced. The Council monitoring stations detected the massive energy signatures immediately. Across the galaxy, advanced civilizations watched in amazement as primitive, human weapons lit up their sensors with destructive force that matched anything their own technology could produce. Impossible, War Marshal Zeflos whispered as his sensors registered nuclear detonations equivalent to entire planetary bombardments. How can such primitive weapons generate that much destructive force? On the Council chambers, Speaker Thexara's crystalline form flashed through every color in the spectrum as she tried to process what their sensors were show. The first nuclear warhead struck the lead swarm hive ship at 1432 Galactic Standard Time. The explosion lit up the Vega system like a second sun, and for a moment, the massive bioship simply disappeared inside a ball of nuclear fire. When the radiation cleared, the hive ship was still there, but something had changed. Admiral Tejo watched from the bridge of the Inchin's Wrath as his sensors registered the impossible. The nuclear explosion had not just damaged the swarm ship. It had torn a hole completely through its hull. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a Void Swarm hive ship had been seriously wounded in the opening moments of battle. All ships continue firing, Tejo commanded. Don't give them time to adapt. Across the human fleet, nuclear missiles streaked through space in waves. Each warhead was primitive by galactic standards, using simple fission reactions that other species had abandoned centuries ago. But against the Void Swarm, these ancient weapons proved devastatingly effective. The swarm's bioships writhed as nuclear fire consumed sections of their hulls. Their adaptive armor, designed to counter energy weapons and plasma attacks, had no defense against atomic destruction. The fission reactions literally tore apart their cellular structure faster than they could regenerate. Fighter pilot Sung Min led his squadron through the chaos, weaving between nuclear explosions as they closed in on the smaller swarm units. His targeting computer locked onto a cluster of feeding pods attached to the surface of Vega 3. Target acquired, Sung Min announced over his radio. Fusion missile away. The missile struck the feeding pods with a burst of artificial sunlight. Unlike the controlled fusion reactions used by advanced civilizations, human fusion weapons were deliberately unstable, designed to release their energy in the most destructive way possible. The explosion vaporized the feeding pods and sent shockwaves across the planet's surface. Confirmed kill, reported his wingman Jung Ho. The pods are completely destroyed, no signs of regeneration. But the real shock came when Captain Dong Hyun's destroyer Soul's Fury opened fire with its railgun systems. The tungsten rods, accelerated to nearly 10% of light speed, struck the swarm hive ships with kinetic energy that defied comprehension. The first rod punched through the lead hive ship's hull like it was made of paper. The second and third rods followed milliseconds later, creating a pattern of devastation that the swarm's biological systems could not possibly repair. The massive bioship, which had survived attacks from the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, began to break, apart under the assault of simple metal projectiles. Impossible readings, reported Sensor Officer Park from the Inchin's Wrath. The hive ship's neural network is going dark. We're detecting massive system failures across their entire fleet. Admiral Tejo studied the tactical display in amazement. The swarm ships were not just damaged, they were dying. Their biomechanical systems, evolved over millions of years to counter advanced technology, had no response to humanity's primitive weapons. But the most devastating moment came when Commander Heejin's nuclear cruiser, the EDS Daegu, demonstrated humanity's ultimate expression of destructive power. As 3 swarm hive ships attempted to cluster together for mutual defense, Heejin ordered the unthinkable. "All ships clear the target zone," she announced over the fleet communication channel. Preparing for ramming attack, the Daegu's crew was already evacuating to other ships via emergency transporters. Within minutes, the massive cruiser was operating on autopilot alone, its nuclear weapons armed for close proximity detonation. "Ramming speed," Heejin ordered from her temporary position aboard the destroyer Mokpo. "May they remember this day forever." The Daegu accelerated directly toward the cluster of swarm hive ships. As the cruiser reached maximum velocity, its nuclear arsenal detonated simultaneously. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, a miniature supernova that consumed everything within 1,000 kilometers. When the radiation cleared, the 3 swarm hive ships had been completely vaporized, not damaged, not wounded, but utterly destroyed at the atomic level. On the Council monitoring station at Proxima Centauri, War Marshal Zephylos watched the destruction in complete silence. His gaseous form had gone completely transparent, a sign of shock that other Nephim recognized as profound trauma. "That's impossible," Zephylos whispered. "The Void Swarm doesn't retreat. They don't die. They adapt and overcome." But the sensor readings were undeniable. Of the 17 swarm hive ships that had entered the Vega system, 14 had been completely destroyed. The remaining 3 were attempting something that no council member had ever seen before. They were trying to flee. Dr. Velnara of the Veltari Science Council studied her instruments with growing amazement. "The swarm's neural network is broadcasting distress signals, but not adaptation protocols or tactical adjustments. They're sending pure terror." "Terror?" asked Speaker Thexara. "The Void Swarm doesn't experience fear." "They do now," Velnara replied quietly. In the Vega system, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The surviving swarm units, stripped of their hive ship support, were being systematically hunted down by human fighter squadrons. Sungmin's pilots had switched from nuclear missiles to kinetic rounds, chasing individual swarm units through the asteroid fields around Vega 4. "This is incredible," Sungmin reported as he watched a tungsten penetrator tear through a swarm warrior unit that could have withstood plasma cannon fire. "They have no defense against simple kinetic impact. It's like fighting with sticks and stones, except the sticks are moving at light speed." The few remaining swarm units began demonstrating behavior that violated everything the galaxy thought it knew about them. Instead of adapting to the human weapons, they were attempting to escape. Bioships that had consumed entire civilizations were fleeing from primitive chemical rockets and metal projectiles. Admiral Tae-ho realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had not just defeated a void swarm attack, they had traumatized the swarm's collective consciousness into retreat. "All ships, pursue the survivors," Tae-ho ordered. "We don't let any of them escape to warn the main fleet." But as the human ships gave chase, something unexpected happened. The fleeing swarm units began broadcasting on frequencies that human equipment could barely detect. The message was being transmitted toward deep space, toward the location of the main swarm fleet. Dr. Minho, monitoring the battle from Earth, detected the transmissions and immediately understood their significance. He opened a communication channel to Admiral Tae-ho. "Admiral, you need to know what just happened," Minho said urgently. "The swarm isn't just retreating, they're sending a warning to their main fleet, but not the kind of warning we expected." "Explain," Tae-ho replied. "They're not reporting human weapon specifications or adaptation requirements. They're broadcasting pure terror. The message essentially translates to avoid this species at all costs. They are more dangerous than us." The implications hit Admiral Tae-ho immediately. Humanity had not just won a battle against the Void Swarm. They had established themselves as something the swarm feared more than their own extinction. As the last swarm units were destroyed in the outer reaches of the Vega system, the human fleet regrouped to assess their victory. They had lost only 12 ships out of 300, while completely annihilating a swarm force that should have been invincible. But the real victory was not in the numbers. It was in the message they had sent, not just to the swarm, but to the entire galaxy. On the Council space station, emergency sessions were being called as delegates tried to process what they had witnessed. The humans, dismissed as primitive just weeks earlier, had accomplished something that no advanced civilization had ever managed. They didn't just defeat the swarm, War Marshal Zeflos reported to the emergency assembly. They made them afraid. The swarm is actually afraid of a species they've never encountered before. Speaker Thexara's crystalline form was cycling through colors so rapidly that other delegates had trouble following her emotional state. How is this possible? Nuclear weapons are primitive. Kinetic bombardment is crude. How can such simple technology be more effective than our most advanced systems? Dr. Velnara had spent the entire battle analyzing the human attack patterns. Her conclusion was disturbing for every advanced species in the galaxy. Because we've been fighting the wrong way, Velnara announced. For thousands of years, galactic civilization has focused on creating more sophisticated weapons, more advanced defenses, more elegant solutions to warfare. The swarm evolved to counter sophistication. And, prompted Council Member Vextar, the humans didn't try to be more advanced than the swarm. They used weapons so primitive that the swarm had no evolutionary response to them. Nuclear fission, kinetic impact, chemical explosives. These are technologies that predate spaceflight. The swarm never developed defenses against them because no spacefaring species still used them. The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity had won not despite their primitive technology, but because of it. Council member Drakes of the Silicon Confederation processed this information through her quantum computers and reached a conclusion that chilled her electronic consciousness. If primitive weapons are more effective against the swarm than advance, Ambassador Kiwu stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but everything had changed. The same crystalline spires rose from the floor, the same gaseous beings floated in their environmental suits, and the same alien delegates filled their assigned spaces. But the silence that greeted his arrival was completely different from the mocking laughter he had faced just months before. This time, So-Min walked beside him carrying recordings of the Vega system battle, detailed reports of swarm casualties and confirmation of something that no advanced civilization had ever achieved: the complete retreat of a void swarm fleet. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Kiwu began, his voice calm and professional, I come before you today to report the results of humanity's engagement with the void swarm forces in the Vega system. Speaker Thexara's crystalline form had settled into a deep blue color that Kiwu had learned indicated careful attention. Gone were the dismissive red flashes and the condescending orange glows. The Veltari leader was listening with the kind of respect usually reserved for species with tens of thousands of years of spacefaring experience. The engagement began at 1430 Galactic Standard Time, Kiwu continued. Human forces encountered 17 swarm hive ships plus approximately 5,000 support units. The battle lasted 4 hours and 37 minutes. He paused to let the timing sink in. Every council member knew that previous battles with the swarm had lasted weeks or months before ending in defeat. A 4-hour engagement suggested either complete annihilation of the human fleet or something unprecedented. Final casualty report, Kiwu announced. Human losses: 12 ships destroyed, 47 ships damaged, 832 personnel casualties. Swarm losses: complete destruction of all hive ships and support units. No survivors detected. The silence in the chamber was so complete that Kiwu could hear the hum of the life support systems. Council members who had fought the swarm for millennia struggled to process what they had just heard. War Marshal Zeflos was the first to speak, his gaseous form swirling with colors that indicated deep confusion. Ambassador Kiwu, are you claiming that human forces achieved a 100% casualty rate against a full swarm battle group? That is correct, Kiwu replied. With nuclear weapons and kinetic bombardment? Asked Council Member Vextar, her mandibles clicking nervously. Correct. Dr. Velnara of the Veltari Science Council leaned forward in her crystalline seat. What was the swarm's adaptation response? How long did it take them to develop counters? To your weapons? So-Min activated a holographic display showing the battle timeline. The recording clearly showed swarm bioships being destroyed faster than they could regenerate, with no sign of the adaptation protocols that had made them invincible for millions of years. There was no adaptation response, Kiwu explained. Swarm biomechanical systems appear to have no evolutionary defense against nuclear fission or high-velocity kinetic impact. Their cellular structure cannot counter atomic-level destruction or simple physical trauma delivered at sufficient velocity. Council, member Drakes of the Silicon Confederation, processed this information through her quantum computers. Her electronic voice carried a note of disbelief as she spoke. Our analysis indicates that nuclear weapons have not been used in galactic warfare for over 3,000 years. Kinetic bombardment has been considered obsolete for even longer. Are you suggesting that these primitive technologies are more effective against the swarm than our advanced energy weapons? I'm not suggesting it, Kiwu replied firmly. I'm confirming it. The data is available for your review. General Young A, present via holographic projection, stepped forward to address the military implications. Her uniform bore the insignia of the Earth Defense Force, an organization that the Council had dismissed as primitive just months earlier. The Void Swarm evolved over millions of years to counter advanced civilizations, Young A explained. They developed adaptation mechanisms for energy weapons, defensive protocols for plasma bombardment, and regeneration systems that could overcome sophisticated attacks, but they never encountered a species that used nuclear fission as a primary weapon. Because nuclear weapons are barbaric, War Marshal Zeflos protested. They contaminate entire systems with radiation. They destroy indiscriminately. Civilized species abandoned such crude tools millennia ago. And that, Kiwu said quietly, is exactly why they worked. Speaker Thexara's colors shifted through several spectrums before settling into a pattern that indicated serious consideration. Are you saying that the swarm's invincibility was based on their ability to counter advanced technology? Yes, Young A confirmed. Every species they encountered tried to fight them with more sophisticated weapons, better shields, more elegant solutions. The swarm adapted to sophistication. They never learned to counter brutality. Dr. Minho's voice joined the discussion via communication link from Earth. I've completed my analysis of the swarm specimens recovered from Vega. Their biological systems show clear evolutionary responses to energy-based attacks, electromagnetic radiation, and plasma physics, but there are no defensive mechanisms for nuclear radiation or kinetic trauma. How is that possible? Asked Velnara. Because no spacefaring species has used such weapons in living memory, Minho explained. The swarm never needed to develop defenses against technologies that civilized species had abandoned. The implications began to sink in around the chamber. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had spent thousands of years developing increasingly sophisticated weapons and defenses. In doing so, they had made themselves vulnerable to an enemy that could adapt to sophistication, but not to simplicity. Council member Jexoth of the Reptilian Alliance raised his head from deep contemplation. What happened to the main swarm fleet? Have they responded to the destruction of their advance force? Kiwu smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. That's the most interesting part of our report. The surviving swarm units transmitted a warning to their main fleet before being destroyed. Our xenolinguists have translated the message. Somin activated another holographic display showing the translated swarm communications. The text was simple and chilling. Avoid species human threat level, apex predator. Adaptation impossible, retreat mandatory. The main swarm fleet has withdrawn to deep space, Kaiwu continued. Long-range sensors confirm that they are moving away from galactic civilization at maximum speed. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm is fleeing from another species. The chamber erupted in voices as council members struggled to comprehend what they were hearing. The Void Swarm, destroyer of civilizations, consumer of worlds, terror of the galaxy, was running away from humans. War Marshal Zeflos's form flashed through colors indicating extreme agitation. This changes everything. If primitive weapons are more effective than advanced technology, then our entire military doctrine is fundamentally flawed. Not just military doctrine, Drakes added. Our understanding of technological progress itself. We assumed that more advanced always meant more effective. Dr. Velnara was studying the battle recordings with growing amazement. Look at their ship movements during the engagement. They didn't try to outsmart the swarm or outmaneuver them. They simply attacked with overwhelming destructive force. No subtlety, no elegance, just pure effectiveness. Speaker Thexara rose from her crystalline seat, her form shifting to colors that indicated formal acknowledgement. Ambassador Kiwu, the Galactic Council hereby recognizes humanity's victory over the Void Swarm threat. We also formally acknowledge our previous misunderstanding of your species' capabilities. Thank you, Kiwu replied diplomatically. Furthermore, Thexara continued, the Council votes to offer humanity full membership in the Galactic Alliance, with permanent seats on both the War Council and the Technology Assessment Board. The vote was unanimous. Every species that had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons just months earlier now recognized that those same weapons had accomplished what their advanced technology could not. But War Marshal Zephylos had one more question. Ambassador Kiwu, what are humanity's intentions now? You have demonstrated military capabilities that surpass anything we previously understood. How do we know you won't use those capabilities against us? Kiwu looked around the chamber at the beings who had dismissed humanity as too primitive to matter. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence of a species that had just proven itself in the most definitive way possible. Marshal Zephylos, humanity never wanted to fight the swarm alone. We came to you first, requesting alliance and cooperation. You rejected us. We went to war anyway, not because we wanted to prove ourselves, but because someone had to stop the threat. He paused to let that sink in before continuing. Now the threat is ended. The swarm is gone. And we're back here offering the same thing we offered before, alliance and cooperation. The only difference is that now you understand what that alliance is worth. General Youngi's holographic form stepped forward to address the military concerns directly. The Earth Defense Force operates under strict rules of engagement. We use overwhelming force against existential threats and precise force against specific problems. The swarm threatened all galactic civilization, so we used everything,